Testing, testing.
You just talk, they will put it on.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's panel on HDP, Humanitarian Development and Peace Nexus in complex conflict context. As you know, I was expecting, quite a number of people to join this panel. Due to the fact that looking at, the trends in terms of, conflicts, there are nearly 300 million people living in protracted conflict situations. And according to the UN Secretary General, this is the highest concentration of humanitarian situation after World War II. And it's becoming really very important that, the HDP Nexus is getting, a lot of attention across the different stakeholders, not because humanitarian interventions are really important, but unless we are able just to break, the cycle and the silos between the three domains, it is extremely difficult to bring about sustainable solutions. And now, with the panel, we'll explore how evaluation systems can better capture the interconnectedness of humanitarian development and peace-building efforts, and how this evaluation can enhance national capacities, resilience, and foster collaboration across the different stakeholders. We are honored to have a distinguished panel with us today, representing a diverse group of experts, both from the UN agencies as well as from government. And we'll have 1 hour and 30 minutes for this session. And as much as we can, we'll try just to make it, as interactive as possible. And we'll have, a set of 5 questions. We'll try just to blend, two questions, and then we'll have, another one to be tackled by the speakers at the end of this panel. So before we jump into the questions, I'm just going to take, 1 or 2 minutes just to quickly introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Anna Claire. I think you have already heard a lot about her during the morning session. She was the moderator. But just to remind you, she is the director, Anna Claire is the director of evaluation at WFP. Prior to that, she served as the deputy director of evaluation in the same organization. And during her career with WFP, she has spearheaded the use of evaluation evidence across the organization program and operations and led the launch of decentralized evaluation function. She has a very extensive experience across different UN agencies. She also served as the regional evaluation advisor in UNICEF. She was the chief evaluation officer at WHO. And currently, she is the vice chair of the United Nations Evaluation Group. Thank you so much, Anne-Claire, just to be part of this panel. Our second speaker is James Afif Jabir, representing the government of Liberia. Mr. Afif Jabir has extensive experience with over 14 years in public sector and 9 years in banking, especially in portfolio administration, management, and credit appraisal and management. Currently, he is the Assistant Commissioner for Real Estate Tax Division in the Department of Domestic Tax, Liberia Revenue Authority. He also served as the Director for Plan Development and Coordination and as Assistant Director for M&E in the Department of Budget and Development Planning, Ministry of Finance and Development Planning. And he has led quite several key critical interventions across different government agencies and the National Development Plan, the Pro-Poor Agenda for Prosperity and Development, and monitoring and evaluation and reporting of development activities. And we are also honored to have our third speaker, Vijaya. She is the Chief of Corporate and Thematic Evaluation within the Independent Evaluation Office of UNDP. She is currently leading a team of evaluation professionals overseeing the conduct of different varieties of corporate and global thematic evaluations. And as a senior evaluation advisor, she also leads global and country-level evaluation, and she has been heavily involved in national evaluation capacity development, and she is also representing IEO, or the Independent Evaluation Office, in the executive board meeting. Overall, she has over 25 years of experience in policy, evaluation, applied research, and prior to joining UNDP, she was a researcher and working on governance issues and gender equality in development at the Institute for Social and Economic Change in India. So we're just going to have, 5 questions for the panelists or speakers. The first 2 sets of questions are really focusing on enhancing national capacities and resilience and contextual success factors, which are really broadly addressing, the Nexus dimension. And then the next 3 sets of questions are really focusing on evaluation, how we can really position evaluation within the Nexus space. And then we'll see the interconnectedness of crisis and resilience, the shared outcomes in Nexus evaluation, and then how we can strike a right balance between learning and accountability, where we talk about evaluation within the Nexus framework. So once we have, the first set of questions being answered by the speakers, we'll open for Q&A, and then it's also an opportunity for the participants to share your experience, challenge, opportunities, insights, and if there is, any good practice in your area of expertise or in your area of work, how you can, the extent to which, this Nexus approach has been looked at as part of your evaluation processes or within, the broader programming. So the first question for you, Anna Clear, is why is Nexus programming crucial for enhancing national capacities and resilience? And probably together with that, you can tell us about, some of the contextual factors that have facilitated the success of Nexus programming. Over to you, Anna Clear.
Thank you very much for this challenging question. So let me try to give elements of answers. The triple nexus, and it's very interesting that we are maybe the leading humanitarian agency sitting side by side with the leading development agency of the UN systems, and then one can also see different perspectives, because from the World Food Programme perspectives, definitely the triple nexus is at the center of what we do. And I would just quote, in 2020, WFP has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and the articulation of the rationale for it was the effort of the organization to combat hunger, promote peace in conflict-affected areas, and prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict. So it's really the 3 elements of the nexus actually resumed in that sentence. In conditions of protracted crisis and instability, national capacities cannot be developed if not through a combination of humanitarian action to save lives, developmental interventions to build resilience, and lay the foundations for socio-economic stability and contribution to peace building to address the structural and root causes of conflict and crisis. We unfortunately have most of the time in countries and in institutions silos, where we are either speaking with development partners, humanitarian organizations, development organizations. The funding channels are also very much disaggregated, where you may have the humanitarian funding or the development funding, while in reality, if we look at the countries who are actually recipients of development aid and humanitarian aid. I did the analysis a few years ago and looking at the 20 most important countries recipients of both humanitarian and development aid, and 17 of them were in the same list. Yet, we are very much still working in silos. So there is a double challenge. There is, within our organization in WFP, we try, with the way we have been organized, where we have three main areas of focus through our strategic plan, where we speak first. The first pillar is really on emergency response. The second one is on resilience. And the third one is on addressing the root causes of food insecurity and hunger. So it requires to work on the three elements at the same time. And evaluations have shown that we need to be working on resilience in humanitarian context to reduce the humanitarian needs in the medium term. So we need to embed, even in humanitarian response, elements of resilience building. So the ability to work short-term and medium to long-term at the same time is very challenging. It's very challenging for a certain number of reasons. The partnerships are very often different, but we are working as one organization in one context. But we have to work with different partners who have different timelines, different characteristics. The second main challenge is the characteristics of the funding we receive. We receive very often short-term funding and very targeted, very earmarked. So it is, as a humanitarian agency, we tend to then focus on emergency response, but we get challenged into building in resilience within the humanitarian context and have a more longer-term perspective. And we have conducted recently the evaluation of our policies on resilience and on climate change, and one of the main challenges of those that the evaluations have identified are, on one side, the silos, and on the second side, the earmarking of the funding, which is really, really affecting the possibility of having a longer-term perspective for activities which do require longer-term perspectives. The third element is certainly, in terms of contextual factor, it is really to have the skills to actually intervene in different contexts and different type of activities extremely fast. And the world around us is moving extremely fast as well, and the ability to adapt to ever more volatile and fragmented context is more and more difficult. And I will not tell now about how difficult it is for evaluation, but just in terms of the key elements of context, there are a few. I don't want to be monopolizing, so I'm happy to share with my partners. I don't know who you want to speak next.
Anna Claire, I think these are really very interesting perspective from an organization which is really focusing on humanitarian, but it has got all the elements of the short-term, mid-term, and long-term perspective. So over to you, Afif Javier. I think you are just going to give us a little bit perspective about how these things are really being positioned, from the government side, because whatever we are talking about, from the UN side or from the different actors, it might not fully resonate to the recipient country, and it's always good to hear the perspective from those who are really driving these processes on the ground. So over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for being here. And interestingly, I have WHO, interestingly, WFP, sorry, and I have the UNDP. So these are our partners. And so it's good for government when you have them on the table before discussing the issue. Because honestly, in terms of the triple nexus, we as government, we partner with them. We know we need the full support in terms of what we do. When we are working towards peace building and development of our country, especially on a crisis situation. There is need for actors involved in humanitarian affairs to provide the support to see to what extent our people who are under conflicts, they can see light after the thunder. And it is under this condition that you find that WFP and other partners like Save the Children, and many will have concerns, who have been coming to Liberia and giving all of the support to see how they can help take our people out of war, take our people out of disasters, and we work collaboratively to ensure that we provide peace to the people. And without peace, then you cannot have development. And so you can see that the triple nexus is important and is there to help evaluate the situation to see to what extent those interconnected challenges of the community that are faced with those issues are being addressed holistically in terms of the approach, and then to see to what extent we can give them the kind of peace that are required before we carry on development. Because without peace, you can have development.
All right, thank you so much for this perspective. I think these are really very important points that we need to consider whenever we talk about, the triple nexus. And now, Vijaya, I think from UNDP's perspective, it has got, all the elements, right? The humanitarian, the development, and the peace. It really falls, nicely within the mandate of UNDP. So,
Thank you, Messe. I must say I'm a Nexus enthusiast. I must make the declaration. I am very positive that Nexus is the way forward, and we come from different agencies, but I think we should cross those individual agency boundaries and work together towards a shared outcome. So let me start with that. So the way I look at Nexus is it's about collaboration. It's about working together. It's about finding areas where one can come together to work towards a common goal. That's how I see Nexus programming and Nexus approach. And we all agree that instability in conflict context leads to vulnerability, and vulnerability increases humanitarian situation, which Anne-Claire was talking about, how difficult it's getting by day. The number of humanitarian situations are increasing. And this also undermines the development processes, and it reverses development achievements that have been made already. So I think we are at a stage increasingly, as we speak, every day. I think we need to think about working together rather than in our own individual agency silos. So there's no two ways about it. But at the same time, I need to quickly add that Nexus doesn't mean that we combine our programs, we always do joint programming. No, it's not about that. It's about aligning our programs in areas where there are synergies and where we can maximize the outcomes, whether it's for humanitarian outcomes or development and peace outcomes, by collaborating together. So we were just having a conversation with Anne-Claire. Maybe at the end of the day, about 25% of the programs in a conflict context actually lends itself to Nexus programming. So there need not be that worry that it means that we have to bring everything together and everybody should working with everybody else, though that's not about Nexus. So it's about taking a little bit more time to identify those areas where actually we can come and join our forces and build on the strengths of the agencies without duplicating the efforts. At UNDP, as you know, UNDP is a development organization, but UNDP is a lead agency for early recovery. And the way UNDP looks at early recovery is that it's not about just responding to the immediate situation, but it's about laying the foundation for longer-term development processes, leveraging this early recovery process to quick start, jumpstart development efforts. That's how UNDP looks at early recovery and getting into Nexus processes. Also, UNDP emphasizes on prevention. So anything UNDP does is towards prevention of conflict. And that means that it has to automatically work with humanitarian agencies, the peace actors, and other development actors to join forces towards peace building and short-term and longer-term development processes. So do we have many examples of Nexus approach? Yes, we had a big example of Nexus approach. That's the Syrian refugee response. All the agencies, humanitarian agencies, development agencies, peace agencies came together to develop this, what is called regional refugee resilience response plan. And this went on for quite a long time, and there were very important lessons from that. I'll come into that later. So they're very good examples where resilience lens was used as an instrument for Nexus programming, and it worked, but there were also important lessons. I will come to that in a bit. But going back to Mess's questions on why Nexus programming is crucial for enhancing national capacities and resilience, I can't agree more with what Anne-Claire and James has already said. I think Liberia, what James has already said and will be sharing, is a very good example of why Nexus program is important. One of the things is what I already mentioned, integrated programming is a must. I think we have learned it in the past 2 decades increasingly that we should start development process as soon as possible. And we cannot sequence humanitarian, then development, and somewhere alongside peace. All this should happen simultaneously, and integrated approaches to addressing some of these challenges is important at the national level. So Nexus assumes importance. At the same time, we need to strengthen the flexibility of the national systems and institutions because crises are not happening one-off, they're happening simultaneously, and at the same time, countries are dealing with multiple crises. So how do we make the national institutional systems very agile is something what we need to address. I would also like to add about the local capacities. Nexus is a process where we can strengthen local capacities even when it's very difficult to engage at the central level. So these are some of the things, maybe we'll come back to it later. But some of the contextual factors, Anne has already mentioned it, but I would just like to go quickly through some of the contextual factors were very critical. One is the political will. We often find that UN agencies may want to do, but they may not be the political will as we heard Liberia had. I wish all the countries would do this similarly as Liberia does, but often there's no political will, and that's a very important contextual factor, and we need to recognize that. And Anne mentioned already about the flexible financing. If short-term financing or short-term financing for early recovery in the case of UNDP, it's not going to work. There should be multiple flexible financing, and donor agencies need to recognize this. And the other one is the local ownership. I think the engagement of the local actors is important. Only when we engage them, there'll be more buy-in of the programming, Nexus programming we do. Lastly, I would like to add that we need to also think about conflict-sensitive issues when we are developing Nexus programming. Just doing Nexus for itself doesn't work. We need to take into consideration the conflict sensitivities. I will stop here. I'm sure there'll be opportunities to come to other issues.
The thing about political will, I just don't want to look at political will. I like to look at political will, commitment, and action. Most of the time, our leader make a statement and say, yes, there's political will. Is it really commitment and actions? Because you can have the political will, but there's no action around the political will, and then there's nothing. And so when we try to see how we move, for example, development, especially considering conflicts where our people are actually suffering, then the government is under constraint too. Because without our partners, in terms of helping to create the condition, the enabling environment for our people to have those basic needs, then it becomes an issue. And so as government work towards having peace and sustainable development, those who are our actors involved in giving support to our people, it's important that we don't only look at political power, we look at the commitment and action to ensure that we work with our different partners and provide those basic services that are needed for our people.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think these are really very critical. Because one thing that we need just to bear in mind is that, we are operating in different contexts and then the diversity. But there are quite a number of, from the 3 speakers, there are quite a number of areas that they converge. both in terms of challenge as well as opportunities, and then some of the successes. So before moving into the next set of questions, probably I think we're just going to open the floor for Q&A, as well as I think this is a good opportunity for all of us just to share our experience. It could be good practices, it could be gaps and challenges, and if there is any insight that you could think could be shared with this group, because at the end of the day we really wanted to make sure that all the experience shared would really help us just to move forward together. Because I think this is the key critical point that has been stressed by the three speakers. One of the objectives is to break the silos among the three domains. So all your inputs and experience would really help just to add into this discussion. So who is going to take the first shot?
Well, let me thank our three speakers. They have laid down the context very well. My question goes to our colleagues from the UN system. We're talking about harnessing let me put it this way. If you contextualize the humanitarian context, the central for that, in my understanding, is about saving lives. It's to save lives, the humanitarian context. If you come to the development context, it's about improving the well-being of the people, creating access to infrastructure, and building institutions. If you talk about the peace-building context, you talk about addressing the root causes. Now, the key words stressed here: national ownership, conflict sensitivity, and all of that. I just want a bit more of some enlightenment. How, in the context of implementing the Nexus approach, that you will not inadvertently be undermining local capacities and, of course, creating conflict.
I think let's take a couple of questions and yeah, please, and then.
Hello. I'm Ignatius from UNDP Liberia. Mine is more like 2 quick points. I'm also from the UN family. So the Nexus approach is very important, but I think one of the things that we've suffered from is, and our colleague from WFP clearly mentioned it, it's the issue of how funding is allowed to be used when it comes to merging between humanitarian and development. And I think one way we've been looking at it is not new, but it's growing momentum, is also looking at portfolio approach programming using the system space. The problem there is, how do we get funding partners or donors on board to allow the flexibility of resources to be used within a context wherein you're bringing so many different focuses? Because the donor, for example, gives resources for something specific and they expect to get result on that. But development and humanitarian work does not work like that. For example, you may have funding for peace building, you may have flooding. How do you be able to bring those two together? So it's very, very important for us to find a way how we can be able to get our funding partners on board, to leave the old way of thinking that resource A is for development or humanitarian aid, but it should be cut across an entire system. And then also, just quickly, was mentioned in terms of political will. Liberia is a clear example, classic example of political dependence. We've been one of the most successful countries when it comes to the UN peacekeeping. And what that has done is that it has allowed the government to literally be dependent on international community. It's like the international community basically is the one who is charged of development in the mindset of people. That was a byproduct of peace building. That was a byproduct of the international community driving development. And it's a lesson and challenge that maybe other countries may need to learn. How do we move from that approach of it is the international community that is driving development, as well as the national government supported by international development and community that is driving development. So I just wanted to just make that observation that in as much as international support drives humanitarian support and development, but it also can create a byproduct in the minds of people that the government, who should be responsible for them, is not responsible, but we think it's an international community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So let's take, one,
Thank you.
question. And then probably, I think for the sake of, everyone, just take, a minute to introduce yourself and which agency you are coming from, so we'll know.
Thank you very much. Kai Jacobson from the still being created Independent Evaluation Department of the Norwegian government, which will establish next year, but covering the entire global portfolio of development, humanitarian aid, peace building, and addressing climate crisis. But coming before that hat from 30 years of working in peace building, first I'd like to start by saying thank you for the work that your agencies are doing, and thank you for the presentations that were shared. I love the HCP Nexus field, so please stop me as the moderator, but to just try and cover a few things. One, as was raised by the speakers, so much of the work being done in silos. We've been speaking for nearly 20 years about area-based planning, implementation, evaluation. In reality, we've seen it done very little or very poorly often, but we've seen how incredibly effective it can be when the right mechanisms are put in place. And that, I think, is one of the keys for an HCP approach. Also, looking at Nexus programming, not only as a response to protracted crisis or humanitarian emergencies, which is too often the lens in which it's brought in, but integrated as a framework of governance, and addressing this point of whether it is intervention-based or built up nationally. A lot can be done to strengthen the integration of HCP Nexus within local and national governance frameworks, but also having a local first-based response, where Liberia has led in this quite often over the last 20 years, to strengthen local and national capabilities for this. I remember Chetan Kumar from the Bureau for Crisis Prevention Response about 10 years ago. UNDP had done a review of 48 countries in which they were supporting peace building and crisis response measures, and identified that 95% of funding went to external agencies and only 5% to local and national capabilities. And that's one of the things we'd like to see flipped in terms of those numbers. You mentioned preparedness, and we can draw on the Ready, Set, Go model from humanitarian response, military, and others, but we have far too little integrated training. So yes, we have different funding lenses and silos, but within our different sectors, we're not having joined up training to understand how to operationalize better together. We have very few mechanisms for integrating lessons from across our fields in HCP Nexus into at the fingertips of governments, policymakers, but also people working within the HCP Nexus in response, and having integrated and joined up needs analysis, goal setting, planning, delivery, implementation, and evaluation and review. We're still working in silos across all of those fields. It doesn't mean, as you said, we don't need to do everything together, but we need to have a lot more joined up analysis, planning, and joined integrated evaluation in the areas we are doing things together. We've also seen in a lot of Nexus work, we don't analyze the gaps in the Nexus. So we look at what's being done, what are the needs, but we don't draw out clearly, these are critical gaps that are not being addressed, and how do we do it? As well as a lot more work to be done on integration into each line. So we've mentioned conflict sensitivity. We've been mentioning conflict sensitivity for 30 years. It's important, if you still do an assessment today, the actual competencies of many practitioners and staff on the ground for doing conflict-sensitive programming and planning is incredibly low, but conflict sensitivity is also an incredibly low bar. We need to look at actually developing programming, which can be peace-building supporting and resilience supporting, which is far too low as well. I apologize, I've spoken too much already, and I haven't even covered a quarter of it, but I would also like to really appreciate what, apologies if I mispronounce, but Vijay Lakshmi and Anne-Claire, you both said in terms of funding. You hear this at every single forum, every space, that the funding mechanisms are not fit for purpose. One of the things that we will be pushing for within the new evaluation department in Norway, and we'd like to work on this with others, is a robust review of funding instruments and practices and how these can be better tailored and better implemented to really meet the needs of agencies, governments, and partners on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think these are extremely useful insights as well as, experience and questions, in fact. Because, this is an evolving field. Even if we have come, a long way, the HDP Nexus is still developing. It is still entangled with, quite a number of challenges and gaps. But, of course, as everybody highlighted, there are also opportunities. So who wants to take the first set of questions? Maybe I think I can start with you, Jen. All right.
So I agree with you, and I can recall in 2007 to 2012, Mala Salib took over the country of Liberia. We have then moved from war to development. And our partners were coming in, and at that time, in fact, the partners were determining our direction. And then I can recall when she said, no, we'll do it as delivery as one. And so we had a big meeting where we said, no, you bring in the money, we do agree, but you cannot tell us where we'll go. Instead, we have our plan, and then you will look into our plan and put your investment in terms of where we want to move our country. And so it was based on that, Liberia now decided to change in another direction. Instead of donors deciding our direction, we were now telling them, look, this is our plan, these are our priorities, and work within our plan. We have always had a problem initially with the way donors move things, like he said, in terms of the finances. We know what is good for our people, and we know that when you are coming from war, the tension the country is faced with, in terms of moving from war to peace, and then therefore going to development, it's not an easy thing as a leader. And so we would love to appreciate our partner as they come to work along with us, but at the same time, we think there's a need to integrate and collaborate because we need you, but at the same time, we want to also create an enabling environment that our people, we've had the kind of opportunity so they can come out of conflict. And if for any reason you cannot give the support in that direction, then the government is under tension. You break the peace, and then there will be no development. And so we need to work collaboratively so that we can work as a team to take our people out of the conflict and then at the same time move toward peace and development. Thank you.
Right. Vijaya.
Thank you. I think excellent questions, and thanks for the reflections you had. Norway always supported our evaluations in conflict-affected countries, and look forward to more collaborations once your office is set up. And they were very flexible, I must say, when we talk about flexible financing for anything. But going back to your question on do we undermine local capacities? I think the fundamental principle about Nexus programming is you need to work with the national institutions in whichever form they are, because it's not about parallelly doing a Nexus program. Nexus program by itself implies the core principle of that is you work with the national systems. And it's about working with the central government or local government. I think you mentioned about the area-based development. I have that as one of the examples. The 3 RPs and one example. Area-based development is one example. And also 3x6 program, which UNDP calls as a sector-based development. Any of these things, it's not about UNDP and WFP and UNICEF working among themselves or working together. It's about working with the government. And government leads this exercise, like just as James just mentioned, it's about government leading it. So there should not be the question of undermining local capacity, but because it should be with the local capacity. And going back to enabling financing, I think we place a lot of emphasis on donor funding, which is very important. But I think the world has moved on, and we're talking about SDGs. We should talk about enabling financing for Nexus, enabling financing for resilience. It's just not among donors, but that money is very important, but we need to go beyond that. I think our conversation should be on how do we promote Nexus, how do we make Nexus programming attractive for private sector financing. I think that should be the discussion on enabling financing in a conflict context. Enabling financing is just not in the development context, but it should be in the conflict context as well. I think that's where the conversation should go. Like colleague mentioned, we've been talking about all of these for 30 years now. Even Nexus is not a new idea. The name is changed, and we've been talking about same thing. And I think it's time now to put things into practice. And I think we have good lessons from, for example, Syrian refugee response. All of this was with the government. And we had coordination mechanisms, we had multi-year funding, but we still didn't go and leverage more financing. I think the language of today should be, how do we mobilize financing for Nexus, not for the agencies, for the government, to lead Nexus programming. I think that should be the point. I think all the integrated aspects, I don't want to add anything further to what was already said. Maybe I'll stop here. Maybe we can come back to the area-based development lessons in a bit. I'll pass it on to Anne-Claire now.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments and for your questions. I like what you started when you were speaking of the humanitarian context about saving lives, and the mantra in WFP is that we are saving lives and changing lives, no? So we work on those two main parameters, and I do totally agree with you that the government is in the lead. The one nuance I would give is that in the humanitarian, as a humanitarian organizations, we are also bound to the respect of humanitarian principles. And those humanitarian principles are independence, impartiality, humanity, and neutrality. And at times, it does not always work with some national priorities or options. So sometimes in the humanitarian context, we are facing very, very difficult choices. And when we are embedding resilience building within the humanitarian response, it is even more difficult. I just wanted to give that nuance in general. Of course, I speak absolutely in general, but those are very, very important principles because at the core of what we do are the most vulnerable. And we do work with others. When we work on a humanitarian response, it is a humanitarian community who is responding. It's not one agency. And the entire humanitarian sector is bound to adhere to those principles. And they are difficult because there are very often trade-offs. It's not like it's clear-cut, this is what we do. There are always pros and cons, and depending on where we come from, the way we strike the balance might change. And when you are in the short-term perspective, it is one thing, but when you try to have a development dimension into the humanitarian response, it becomes extremely complicated. I just wanted to give that nuance.
Great, thank you so much. I think you have tried to address, quite a number of questions, of course. This is, the start of, a kind of reflection. And now we'll zoom in on the aspect of evaluation, because we have already tackled, the national level, capacity, and then a little bit of contextual factors. And now we do have, two sets of questions, again, as I mentioned, focusing on evaluation. So the first question is, how can evaluation systems deepen understanding of the interconnectedness of crisis and resilience rather than treating HDP efforts as separate silos? And how have shared outcomes among agencies improved Nexus programming evaluation? So this time I will start with you, Vijaya, and then we'll move to Anna-Claire and then James.
Thank you. I just, before I start on the questions on evaluations and how evaluation systems can deepen understanding, I must admit that as an evaluator, I don't think we are doing enough about evaluating the Nexus programming adequately. In our office, we very recently developed a framework to evaluate Nexus programming because we've been doing a series of evaluations in the conflict-affected countries. Iraq, Syria is coming up, CAR, DRC, Somalia, MN. So we thought we need a framework so that as evaluators, we have a shared understanding of how do we go about doing an evaluation of Nexus programming. One of the things we often get stuck is, okay, we go and ask, is Nexus programming happening? And we often get an answer, no, there's not much Nexus programming going on here. So we think there's nothing to evaluate. But what we realized is we should also evaluate when program is not happening, why UN agencies are not getting together and doing a Nexus program, why they're not promoting it, why they're not identifying areas for synergies and identifying the outcomes, because it's part of the resident coordinator's function to pursue where possible, not everywhere. Anne Claire is very right. There are some humanitarian situations which call for independence and reaching out the communities which may be more vulnerable and where independent decisions should be taken. But having said that, there are many areas which allows one to work together. But why is it not happening? I think all evaluation should assess that, and I must admit we are not doing a good job at that. I think what in our office we are doing is an effort to correct that and go forward in a better way. But coming back to the question of what Messi asked on evaluations, I must say that it's not anymore a choice as UNDP or anybody, it's just an urgency, I must say, because no refugee crisis I know has ended. If we talk about 200 million people displaced, both internal and externally displaced, only 5% of the external went back to their original countries or places of residence, and IDP is only 1%. So people just remain where they are, and many of them for 10 years or more. I don't know any can recollect crises that had ended. So this really calls for, this protracted crisis calls for how the way we approach this whole issue need to change. We cannot anymore do sequentially humanitarian development peace, because generations will be lost. People lose a generation in getting stuck in this. We've seen it in Liberia. We've seen it in several other countries. People lost 20 years. So we cannot afford that. We do recognize that, but what are we doing about it? So in terms of the evaluation, I think we need to have a holistic approach to data collection. Often we do that in silos. I think agencies should get together with the government to do some holistic data collection so that we have gender disaggregated data. We are collecting data in a sequential way. The humanitarians are collecting humanitarian data, and then we are doing development data and peace data as well. And we need to have cross-sectoral indicators. We need to identify areas that are very cross-sectoral and have indicators so that agencies even by themselves are working on them, and then we can assess it in a proper way. And the third one is the systems thinking and systems-based analysis. I don't want to sound very cliched when we say systems thinking, but I think one need to but systems-based approaches and analysis helps us to identify the complexity of the situation and how we can approach resilience building, and what are the areas we can zero in on instead of doing everything. So I think we have good examples such as area-based development, where agencies came together and worked on specific aspects at the local level and identified those indicators, taking a systems-based approaches. I think that would be very good for evaluations. And definitely, I would say integrated evaluation frameworks among the UN agencies, particularly identify areas where they can have evaluate things together or individually and then synthesize it. That would be the thing. And lastly, I would like to say that we need to learn from the local actors. I think we don't do that enough. We need to have evaluation approaches where we can learn from the local actors as well. But I don't know whether you would want me to go to the second question as well? Yes, please go ahead. Okay. And coming to whether shared outcomes helps, definitely yes. I think I'm a big fan of the 3RP program, regional refugee resilience program, where agencies spent a lot of time in developing shared outcomes, and that really helped when we went to do evaluations. But that's not the full story, right? There are other things that need to be there that would help better evaluations. But that was one of the things. There was this resilience lens which UN agencies developed, and I must give credit also to the humanitarian agencies, which gave it a shot and came together and looked at the resilience lens, and we also heard from Anne-Claire how they went and had a resilience pillar. This was subsequent to that. So resilience became a catchword, not only among development agencies, but also among the humanitarian agencies. So this resilience lens, when they identified indicators, it became easier for evaluations to go and assess that. And then, of course, we talked about the collective outcomes itself. But I must say, this is not enough. I think there's more to it. It's more to about the indicators, whether we collected data on those indicators, because we also struggled when we evaluated 3RP program. Unless we have those indicators, we collect information for those indicators, and we simultaneously strengthen the data processes of the government, I think it still becomes tough for the evaluations to conduct it. On the third questions on whether it's about accountability or learning or impact, I think it's neither accountability nor learning. I think it should be both, but I don't think we should stretch anything to an extreme. We shouldn't stretch learning to the extreme so that we lose focus on accountability. At the same time, we shouldn't stretch accountability too much so that the impact frameworks become so rigid that we lose focus of what we wanted to assess. I think the way forward would be promoting adaptation in assessing in our evaluation how the programs contributed to more transferring knowledge and strengthening resilience for the national institutions to better cope with the capacities. I think that should be the focus of our evaluations, and it should be a combination of learning and accountability, in my view. I'll stop here, but happy to come back to other points.
I think most of it.
Yes, indeed. Maybe a few points. When we look at the Nexus, what is critically important, it's not to think sequentially, but it's to think simultaneously. In the evaluations we do, especially when we evaluate our country strategic plans, which is really the document which is an agreement between any country and WFP, we actually have standard questions in each of our evaluations where we look at the linkages between the humanitarian, the development cooperation, and the contribution to peace, when it is relevant to ask that third dimension of the Nexus. It's not always necessary, no? But when it is, we take those three elements together, and we always look at how the organization has contributed to the three dimensions in the course of the implementation of the program which had been agreed to with the government. But it is also a challenge internally. Huh? I mean, the silos exist externally, exist in terms of funding, but something that we are very strong in our evaluations, and we very regularly feed back to our colleagues, is that sometimes we ourselves tend to work in silos because we have different units who are working with different objectives, and even though they are integrated in a common plan, there is only one plan of support, still the risk of disaggregation and fragmentation is there. So it is something that constantly we need to be very much aware of. Like in development, people in different sectors don't tend to necessarily liaise with each other, no? I mean, it's a universal finding from wherever we are evaluating that risk of fragmentation is there. I do think that joint evaluations are a very important tool to actually overcome some of those challenges, but not to do them at all costs either. Because there is sometimes a push from some of our partners to oh, you have to evaluate together. Well, not necessarily. So we have to be lucid enough to know when it adds value and it is worth the additional effort, because it takes effort to do joint evaluations. But at the same time, there is really potential for those type of exercises as well. For example, we are just finishing now an evaluation with UNICEF on school feeding program in South Sudan. So it is in a humanitarian context, it's an impact evaluation, and it looks at school feeding from WFP side and the nutrition elements of the school feeding program on the UNICEF side, and in the context of one single evaluation. So, and I could give you quite a lot of those examples where indeed it is very important to do a joint evaluation. And here I just mentioned a joint evaluation with another UN agency. But what we do pay a lot of attention to, it is joint evaluations with governments. We have in WFP what we call decentralized evaluations, and I know my colleagues are also, have also that dimensions in their respective organization, but decentralized evaluations are those which are directly managed by our colleagues in country offices. And in more and more cases, we do want to do these evaluations with the government partners of the programs that we are supporting, no? So that, for me, is an excellent way to break the silo dimension. On the shared outcomes question, I am not sure I would speak of that shared outcomes really help evaluate the nexus. I would rather speak of complementarity of the outcomes, because when we speak of shared outcomes, for me, there is a risk of blurring the picture and the added value of each of the partners actually working on the achievement of these outcomes. So yes, we have all the same goal, but within these goals, we are all responsible for different things, because otherwise, I find sometimes difficult when I look at the UNCT framework and I see that, the UNSDCF, sorry, and I see that there are like 15 agencies against one outcome. And I really wonder, okay, but then who is supposed to do what to achieve that outcome? And if I don't understand clearly who is supposed to do what, I just cannot evaluate either. And it is not about attributing results to a specific element, but it is about knowing exactly what is it that needed to be done in order to achieve the outcome. So shared but complementarity. Let's be clear as to who is doing what. Then on the last question, on learning and adaptation versus accountability and impact, I must say, if the question intended to be provocative, it worked, because those are elements I would definitely not oppose. I do believe that as soon as we publish results of an evaluation, even if that evaluation was purely for learning purposes, but we are accountable. We are demonstrating how and how relevant we have been and how effective we have been and whatever. So for me, accountability and learning are mutually reinforcing. They are not at all being opposed. I do think, however, that depending on the timing of the evaluation, for example, at the moment we just are completing the midterm evaluation of the entire strategic plan of the organization. We are midterm. Of course, the emphasis is on learning. But when I will present to my executive board in a month's time the results, they will see it as an accountability exercise. So depending on who is looking at the evaluations, the emphasis will be on one side or the other of the balance, if we have to put a balance. Similarly, on impact, I don't find at all that impact is actually an accountability tool per se. The way we are doing impact evaluation in our organization, it's primarily for learning, and we are not even putting any recommendations on our impact evaluations because they are so geared into changes in the programming work And they are so specific into what works and what doesn't that not to take action on this is almost impossible. But it also depends on what is it that we look at when we measure impact. But within the programming, honestly, I do not find that as an accountability instrument, although when I see that our colleagues from the German government, or from NORAD actually, we are doing at the moment an evaluation of school feeding in Malawi with NORAD as a partner, and I am sure that the way they will look at it, the way we will look at it, and the way the government of Malawi will look at it will be 3 different perspectives. And I am happy to stop here and respond to questions. Thank you.
From the government perspective, we think there is a need for understanding the program effectiveness. Usually when we are the government side, as you work closely with other actors in the sector, we are equally concerned to see to what extent the livelihood of our people are being transformed in terms of the support that you give. And so we are under tension from our own people to see how the lives can be transformed, because once those assistants are supposed to reach them are not reaching them, you realize that the government is under tension, there will not be peace, and then government cannot move forward in terms of development. So we believe shared outcomes are very important in terms of enhancing the quality and the impact of NECS program. And so that strengthening the relationship between the different actors and promote collaboration, accountability, and transparency. And from the government side, if for any reason we are not getting the kind of information in terms of the kind of work that you do, it will not, because I had an experience when I went to work in the county, and you realize that there will be, for example, one actor doing a particular job in this particular district, and you find another actor doing the same job in the particular area. I mean, it becomes an issue. Government need to see to what extent there will be no duplications, because it's not helping. You have several areas that you can go into and help to transform lives of people, but you realize most of our donors could be doing, or partners could be doing, or actors could be doing similar thing in one area when there are several other areas you can provide the support around. So for the government side, yes, we need to be reviewing and seeing to what extent your support is enhancing the well-being of our people, because we are on attention to see that we bring peace to their lives, because if they don't have the peace, if you don't provide the support, they will not have the peace. We are under pressure, and we want to move development forward, because if we cannot move development forward also, it's in another sense useless. Thank you.
So let me just say, I'm a government. Yes, please go ahead. Yeah, thank you to the speakers. I think you've laid everything out very well. But I believe both the government and our development partners, including UNDP, we all have to learn what we call strengthening coordination. And like my friend just stressed, even in the UN, coordination is difficult. They don't work together. And they confuse government in that context. Because I know you talk about preventing fragmentation and not working in silo, not working in parallel, and to the extent that you have UN as one. Okay, that's what you have right now. But the practicality on the ground is not the case. And that is affecting government. Even ourselves as a government, we as much as we don't intend to be dependent, because we should be taking the leadership and applying the different principles. We also got an issue that we're not coordinating well. So you should help us. We need to harness our resources, become much more focused, all right, in a more strengthened and coordinated manner, so that the dividends of that can contribute to cumulative impact on the lives of our people. And I just want to make that point. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I think now we're just going to take a few questions, as well as any experience that you wanted to share, especially on areas that has really worked or hasn't worked, and any lesson from your experience in terms of, using, evaluation system to deepen, the understanding about, the interconnectedness across the three pillars. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Mahmoud Said. I'm the National Emani Director from Somalia. I think many of you are familiar with Somalia, many of you may not. So to share experience, we are now building the capacity and the capability of our national staff. We now have the national Emani policy in place, now institutionalizing that policy into government institutions. We are about to have the national monitoring and evaluation system in place. We are now about to have the national evaluation curriculum, national evaluation standards. We have established technical working groups, both at national and state levels. In December this year, for the first time ever, we are going to have the first national Emani conference in Somalia. So that is just to share experience on how far we are in matters of Emani in Somalia. So I have a question for my colleagues from UN agencies. UN, as UN, spent 1.45 billion in Somalia last year alone. 1.45 billion last year alone. 832 million of that money was implemented by WFP and FAO. And that went into a social pillar. 832 million, that's almost 78% of the money I was talking about, went to a social pillar. So there are always issues in mismanagement of funds. There are always issues in aid diversion, money not reaching to clients. Yeah. So there are always issues in accountability, transparent, and working with the government. As a government national Emani director, I cannot tell that this billion money that went into Somalia last year alone have reached to the people of Somalia. I cannot verify from the government perspective. So we have only received reports, good reports with good figures, written well, from UN agencies, saying that this money went to Somalia. How, when, and to who, we cannot verify. This year, UN Sustainable Cooperation Framework is coming to an end. We have established a joint evaluation reference group. Then each UN entity has what they call, for example, WFP or FAO or UNDP has a country program document. That is also coming to an end this year. It also needs to be evaluated. We have so far initiated processes with UNICEF and UNDP in Somalia. So my question is, how these joint evaluations are done in other countries? What are the government role? And because sometimes government involvement is less. It's only UN with it is, who does, the data collections, make the engagements with the line ministries, collect the data, put that into report, and share with maybe Minister of Planning or Department of Monitoring to just have a look at it and co-sign. But who did the real work? Recently, I concur with my brother from Norway. We were reviewing a project through Somali Joint Fund. It was a 15 million project. When we looked at the concept note, we have realized that 400,000 will reach to the client out of 15 million. 32% of that money will go to salaries of individuals. Only 400,000 out of 15 million will reach to the clients. And that money is meant to the needy people in the field, the needy Somali people. And only 400,000 will reach. It is a taxi payers money from contributing countries. So money is wasted somewhere, and it does not reach to the intended people. So that is all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this practical examples, and this really emphasized the need, just to strike the right balance between, accountability and learning. I mean, the one that you mentioned about, the aid diversion, which is becoming, a chronic problem across different countries. And this really emphasized, the need that, of course, due to the dynamic conflict situation, of course, the learning dimension has to be given prominence, but equally, the accountability should also be underpinned. So I'm just going to turn, the questions to the panelists. Who wants to take, who wants to tackle, these questions?
Thank you very much for your questions. We do different types of exercise, if I count only from evaluation perspective, but we also do audit. There is another department in WFP who is actually checking appropriate use of the budgets, and they also publish audit reports. I do not know if there has been one recently in Somalia, but if it has not been this year, it will be next year, because they do it every 2 years in Somalia. So that's one part, which looks more specifically at the risks dimension. Now, on evaluation side, there are, again, two types of evaluation. There will be the decentralized evaluations. I do not know if recently there was one led from the country office, but most of the time when there are decentralized evaluations, they are jointly done, or they are done in great consultation with government counterparts. For the country strategic plan evaluation that we do, they are done by my office directly, and they look primarily at WFP's program. We have huge interactions with governments as we undertake those evaluations, but we don't do them jointly with government in any country of the world at the moment. So there is a clear approach. What we try to do is to synergize with other UN agencies who are doing country-level evaluations so that we do not overburden the country, but we do them hiring external evaluation teams to conduct the evaluation for us. But what we do systematically, so there are a huge number of interactions with the government throughout the evaluation process, and at the end, and there are debriefings with all the stakeholders in the country, so the government, but also civil society partners and multilateral and bilateral agencies present in the country. And at the end of the evaluation process, we do organize a workshop where the evaluation team will present the findings of the evaluation, and there will be conversations to finalize the recommendations of the evaluation. But the recommendations are always targeted to WFP. They are never targeted to governments. So that is why it is really an accountability exercise we are providing to the executive board. But because it is an exercise we need to do to inform the development of the following plan in any country. And at the moment, we are in the process of at the start of an evaluation in Somalia, and therefore there will be opportunities for you to engage with the evaluation as we move forward.
Thank you. I think I'll be repeating what Anne-Claire has already mentioned. But let me start with your question on UN coordination. I agree with you fully about UN coordination and the fragmentation. But I think it goes back to, again, national institutions, how they take control of development cooperation or humanitarian response or crisis response on the ground. The stronger the government agencies in taking stock of these and letting know how it should be done, the lesser would be more an uncoordinated approach of UN or any other agencies working in a country. So your first point is totally, and I agree with you. I think all our evaluations say that, and I think increasingly we collaborate among UN agencies to address that issue. I think that's recognized. All of us are on the same page, and all of us are working towards to reduce that. That effort is constantly there. So I am with you on that. On Somalia, I think you raised very important questions. Just on the Nexus, you may be already aware that World Bank, UN are having a Nexus program in Somalia. And as you know, we are just going to start the country program evaluation of Somalia, and we'll be looking at that issue, how UN and UNDP are engaging in this joint World Bank and UN Nexus programming. So we'll be looking at that program as well. I think some of the questions you raised, Anne-Claire already answered about the WFP program. As far as UNDP is concerned, we also have an audit program which looks at, there's an internal audit done by the country office, and there is a audit done by the New York. They will do an audit just to ensure that there is no mismanagement of funds. They will be looking at whether there'll be forensic audit, the bigger the amount, more audit will be done. And then in the evaluation, we'll be looking at how the funds are being spent, etc. As again, like humanitarian agencies like WFP, the procedures are different, but UNDP, we work with the government. Any country program evaluation we do, you will receive the terms of reference very soon. The country office will share with you the terms of reference. We don't do joint evaluations for two reasons. One, the governments are not interested in this joint evaluation. Not everybody is interested. They say it's UNDP's programs, why are we wasting time joining that evaluation? Of course, we keep them engaged. You will comment on the terms of reference. You'll be consulted at every stage of the evaluation. When we do the emerging findings, we'll do a debriefing to you. When the evaluation report draft is there, you will get the draft to comment on those drafts. So you have an opportunity to share your views. And when we complete the evaluation, there'll be a workshop, not by UNDP itself. The workshop is jointly with the Minister of Planning or whoever is the counterpart of UN in the country. So we'll have a joint workshop. The country director of UNDP and the government counterpart will be there in that, and then we discuss how to take forward the recommendations. So there is a very well-established process. We did explore joint evaluations, but often we find governments are not interested to participate in it. And I am with them. Why should they waste time when they have so many other things to do? So that's something I would like to emphasize, but do let us know if you're interested in joint evaluation. I think many UN agencies, humanitarian agencies have a limitation. They can't engage, but other UN agencies, yeah. But I think always we are open to engage. Do let us know if you want to engage in joint evaluations. I think they'll be open to that. I'll stop here.
From my perspective, being in monitoring evaluation, I think there's need for joint evaluation. I don't know why is it that people would think that government will want to join evaluation. You cannot be supporting government in terms of their development, and you plan along with them, you execute, but then time for government to take stock of what have you implemented, and you say there can be joint evaluation. I think there's need for joint evaluation. Most of the time, people don't put, and that's the question we should be asking ourselves, are we sure we're going to accomplish SDGs? Or to what extent are we putting time into supporting evaluation? Because if you look at all of the countries around the world, are people really supporting the evaluation? Not much, because people see evaluation to be audit. So to what extent are you also collaborating with government to support the process of evaluation so that we can take stock of what government has done and see the result? What have you done in terms of support to the people in that country? And so joint evaluation also looks at your support and the result of your support in terms of the outcome or the impact that has been made. The same thing with government. We also want to know, because the people are holding them to the fire, in terms of knowing what have they done in terms of the resources they have spent out there and to what extent they're making impact. And so joint evaluation will allow the opportunity for the people to see what has happened based on the donors working along with government. And so they believe strongly there could be some objectivity around that. Because if you have the donors and government doing joint evaluation, they believe strongly that the results, no one will be leaning on one side, because the donor, government will be watching donor will be watching government, and so the results could be a little more accurate. Unlike if you have government just doing an evaluation, and then you just doing an evaluation, it may just satisfy your side and just satisfy government. I think that there should be a joint evaluation to show and create a condition of effectiveness and efficiency.
Yeah, thank you so much for this remarks, and this brings us to the end of this panel. I think the panelists have shared with us quite a number of headways and headwinds, because a blueprint approach doesn't really work in every context. But I think we agree, all of us, we agree on the underlining or the fundamental principles that really defines the triple nexus, and how evaluations really help us just to deepen our understanding on what works, what didn't work. And I think as we continue just to have such kind of discussion, it will help us to unpack and advance this work, both from the perspective of programming, but more importantly from evaluation. So thank you so much for sharing this excellent insights, the panelists, as well as all the audience for sharing your thoughts and then posing, quite important, questions. And yeah, we'll end here. Thank you so much.